What do you want to do with your life? Do you realize how precious it is? Do you realize how fragile your life is? And does that realization cause you joy or stress? Most of us in quiet reflection would admit, at least to ourselves, that we want to make something of our lives. If we're in the proverbial winter of our life, we would want to look back and know that our life had counted for something. Well, so does God. God has a keen interest in us making something of our lives. God not only hopes that we'll use our lives well, He expects it. I think we can make the case that He commands it. And why not? Hasn't God made a huge investment in our lives? Hasn't God set the bar sky high when it comes to the value of our life? He has knit us together in our mother's womb. He has known us completely from before birth. He has devised and determined and delivered a plan of salvation involving the painful and shameful execution of His Son's life for the sake of our life. God has, as He always does, taken the first step in investing in our life. And now He calls us to invest our lives and everything contained therein for His glory. Now here's an insight that we have as to why God can expect, indeed command, a return on that investment in our lives. Because they're His. Every breath and every beat will be returned to Him for account. But make no mistake, they're not ours. Do we think as Christians that we're making room for God in our life? No. God is our life. Everything our lives are, everything our lives contain, every return of our life is His. And our lives, along with every other thing in the created universe, has as their primary purpose and ultimate purpose the glory of God. The purpose of everything is the glory of God. To know that and to embrace that is so liberating. To know that and not embrace it, I imagine, is horrifying. Would require either, well, probably just a lot of escapist behavior. Pretend it's not. But to know that, embrace that, is so liberating. Because we've found the meaning to life. Search no more. Want to know what your purpose in life is? Glorify God. Now the question might be, well, how do I glorify God? My answer to that question is, I don't know. I don't know. Contained in this room and our friends online, I would suggest probably 1 billion different options. We could go to uni. We could go to school, to the gym, attend choir, teach kids, do taxes, drink coffee, play tennis, walk, run, dig, plant, build, paint, cook, clean, drive, sing, sew, and too many other things that could involve us glorifying God. And we can't even get to mention spiritual gifting and divine appointment. How will we glorify God with our lives? With all of them. The answer to how should I glorify God with my life is found largely in the answer to what has He given me to work with? He's given me something to work with. He's given you something to work with. Now, whatever that is the answer to how we should glorify God with our lives. What should I put to work for His glory? It is that I will present Him with great joy when I come to account. What a great day for wise investors it will be when we breathe our last breath on this earth. Or our Master returns and we get to give an account of what He gave us. What a great day for wise investors that will be. On the contrary, what a catastrophe it will be to bring a rotting return of His provision on account of a misappropriated life. Here's the tip. Any life that doesn't glorify God is misappropriated. I'm talking about buried talent. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells us a parable about buried talent. So what's a parable? A parable is a short story illustrating a moral or spiritual truth. Jesus used these short stories to great effect in His ministry. Case in point, maybe parable of the talent we're about to look at, and many others there you can read. It's a short story. What's a talent? We think we know what talent, well, we do know a definition of talent, but it's not what's in view here. We think a talent might be a knack or an expertise or an ability to do something. That's not what we're talking about in this context. A talent here is a weight of money. It's a weight of currency. In ancient times, there were various weights and sizes and materials with which people bartered for goods and services. And the heaviest biblical weight that we have is actually a talent. A talent was about 34 kilos. So as we read this parable and we see that God gave, the master gives 5, 2, and 1 talent, effectively someone got 170 kilos, someone got 68 kilos, and someone got 34 kilos worth of what we might call money, collateral, resources to use in the master's business. The master in the parable is Jesus. The servants are His disciples. They are operating by His provision on His behalf as those who will give an account to their master for that which He has entrusted to them. We should take notice as His disciples. This story should give us instruction as to our approach in a life of serving God with all that God has entrusted to us. And everything we have, including our last and next breath, is entrusted to us, including our bank accounts. So verse 14, Jesus begins the parable, "For it is just like a man to go on a journey. He called his own servants and entrusted his possessions to them." Now, Jesus has since embarked on that journey, hasn't He? Since He told this parable to those people there, He has. Journeyed to the cross, journeyed through the tomb, now journeyed to ascend to the right hand of the Father, interceding for us, and he will return. And or we will meet him. Verse 15, to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, depending on each one's ability. Then he went on a journey. Notice here the different talents given in accordance with the different abilities. What does that say about the one who distributes? He knows his servants well. He knows what they can handle. Remember, the talents here are not natural powers that we sometimes call talent, but our definition of talent is touched on here, kind of, isn't it? Because he distributes this currency in accordance with people's ability, what we would now classify as talent. You're talented in that regard, you get more. It's wise management. What's interesting to me here is there's no equal share of resources in this household. There's no equal share of created wealth either, is there? The goal of this household is not to make sure that no one is too poor or no one is too rich. The governor of this house is not held responsible, nor is he accountable for providing equally for all. Does that jump out at you? It jumped out at me this week as I read this. He distributes whatever he will to whomever he will in accordance with his will and knowledge of his servants. A knowledge of what they can profitably administer according to their ability. Maybe there's an opportunity for us. Maybe we should listen to some invitations here when God says, "Can I trust you?" Put that in the pocket. From everyone in Luke 12 who's been given much, much will be required. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, even more will be expected. It comes with something of a responsibility. But friends, we've all been given something by the Lord to steward. Oh man, we are wealthy if we know the Lord. Something of an inestimable value. Amazing grace. The blood of his Son. Our calling to deny ourselves, carry our cross, and follow him is a gift. It's a talent that we must put to work for his glory. And God has given us different abilities in his providence concerning our minds and our bodies and our temperament and our estates and our location and our opportunities. He's given us all different distributions, and it's his prerogative to do so. But let no one believe we don't have a great treasure to steward, that we don't have a great talent entrusted to us in the soul saved to the glory of God. As God has made clear, we are members of one body, but with different functions. So too do we have different opportunities and different abilities. And it will be for those entrusted to us that will be held accountable. With much, much to be accountable for. With little, less. but accountable all the same. After putting his affairs in order, the master went on that journey, which is, if you think back, reminiscent to Jesus the night before his departure, and just giving the disciples all this command and instruction, almost as one in haste before the cross and ascending to the Father ultimately. Verse 15, immediately the man who had received 5 talents put them to work and earned 5 more. In the same way, the man who earned 2 more, but the man who'd received 1 talent went off. He dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled the accounts with them. The man who received 5 talents approached, presented 5 talents, and said, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I've earned 5 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share in your master's joy." There's a pretty inspiring outcome. The man with 2 talents also approached. He said, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I've earned 2 more talents." Well, his master said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy." Notice here that from those he has given 5 talents, the master has an expectation of an improvement of 5. In other words, the master expects to reap generously where he has sown generously. Right? I've given more. I expect more. Keep that. Take note of that. This master reaps generously where he sows generously. But to the one he is entrusted with 2 talents, he expects the improvement of 2 talents. Not 5. He didn't say, "Hey, this guy gave me 5 talents. Why didn't you give me 5? I guess that will do." No. Both received the same reward. Same reward for different returns in accordance with what they were entrusted with, in accordance with their ability. They received generous and hearty praise from their master. "Well done. You brought 5, well done. You brought 2, well done. Good and faithful servants," he calls them. Now, we know there's no one good but God. So this title doesn't refer to the general notion of goodness, but to the specific quality of our stewardship. Are we good stewards? We're not ultimately good. We're made good by Christ, but are we good stewards? And the second word there, faithful, is perhaps the definition of the first, the goodness. Are you good and faithful? If you're faithful, you're good. Are we faithful? With good management of God's provision? That's the question this parable is asking us. And the resolution this parable should inspire is to be good and faithful stewards. The result of such good management is an increasingly wider horizon of labor. Faithful in small things leads to entrusted with bigger things, bigger portfolio, greater things, as abilities are developed, tested, and proven through faithful application of grace. An application of grace. The reward for good work is increased work in the kingdom of God. And it's only a faithful servant of God that would relish that and not see that as a burden. How do we see it? Do we want more work in the kingdom? The end of which is revealed in 23, where he says, share your master's joy. There's a key to joy. It's good stewardship of a life to the glory of God. That's the key to joy. Where's the joy? Where good stewardship of a life to the glory of God exists. That's where the joy is. On the night Jesus was betrayed, he imparted something of a strange bequest to his disciples. Strange in this context, you might think. You're about to be horrifically murdered. We're about to be scattered and persecuted. What did he impart to his disciples? Joy. John 15, I've told you these things so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete. Jesus, our Master, welcomes all his faithful servants who have known the fellowship of his sufferings into the joy that was set before him. That's why he endured the cross, and the joy is now set before us as we carry our cross, as we steward our lives well to the glory of God. And now, the inactive servant. Verse 24, the man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, Master, I know you. You're a harsh man. Remember? Reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered. So I was afraid and I went off and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours. His master replied to him, You evil, lazy servant. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, supposedly, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and I would have received my money back with interest when I returned. Notice the contrast here in the dealings between the good and faithful servants and the evil, lazy servant. That's a big contrast. When the good and faithful servants came to give an account of their stewardship, they both began with the acknowledgement of their Lord's gift, didn't they? They each said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. Master, you gave me 2 talents. The Lord's giving was at the forefront of their mind. His ownership of that gift was at the forefront of their mind. And no doubt, a driving force of both their joy and their prudent work. The evil, lazy servant, however, made no acknowledgement of the provision. Just an accusation of the character, trying to justify his laziness. He says, I know you, you're harsh. You reap where you have not sown and gather where you have not scattered. Man, could anything be further from the truth? Doesn't every good thing come from the God of all creation? Doesn't the sun shine and the rain fall on the just and the unjust alike? Isn't the earth full of the goodness of God? His goodness is running after us constantly. We just sung about that. So far is our master from being an unreasonable master. So far from reaping where he has not sown. Our Lord is constantly reaping nothing from where he has sown generously. Just in my life. How about the world that enjoys his beaches and his food and their families and their abilities? Even in the case of the two faithful servants here in this parable, we see the same reward for different measures in accordance with what was sown. You see, it shows a lack of sight to see God as more demanding than he is, infinitely giving. If you think God is more demanding than he is, infinitely giving, you don't see him. You don't know him. Because he's just not. How do we see him this morning? How do we feel about investing our lives and all that they contain for the sake of his glory? Not ours, probably our suffering, his glory. Pray our eyes will be open to that this morning. Because talents buried in self-indulgence and mismanagement are never as heavy when they're carried back for account. He didn't just give him what he was given. That opportunity was past. This treasure does rust. A life not devoted to God is never carried back to him unspoiled. So what will we do with our life? And before we answer that, we need to heed the warning of this parable. Doing nothing is enough for ruin. The master said, if you were going to do nothing with what I gave you, you could have at least given it to the bankers. Then I would have received something of interest back. Now, with parables, it's always something we need to be careful to do, is not assign specific identities to every character that features in a parable. The main thrust of the story is always the point, not the minutiae of the metaphor. And we don't have to say, well, this means that and that person represents that. So we don't know the specific identity of these bankers. But I would suggest they may or may not be the church. Jesus says, if you're going to do nothing with what I've given you, you could have at least given it to someone who would put that to work on your behalf, or instead of you, on my behalf. Then I would have seen some fruit from what I'd given you, even if you weren't going to produce it. Either way, the principle here is something is better than nothing. And if we're too weak for independent action, if we're not prepared to do something for the Lord that He's calling us to do, we should at least support those who are willing. That's how I read that. Suffice to say, inaction is inexcusable in the stewardship of life to the glory of God. And if we're not going to do it, connect with or support someone who is. Jesus concludes in verse 28, so take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. I see Jesus feels the same way. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw this good-for-nothing servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That does not sound fun. Gifts of God, which is life and all it contains. Gifts of God, unemployed for his glory, are stripped off a soul on the day to account. Just as gifts of God employed for his glory are increased on that day. What a great opportunity we have. What a terrible warning we have. In light of that truth, this parable should have a huge impact on us either way. Don't you think? We don't need to wait for eternity to see that true possession is use. Use increases power and blessing in the Christian life. Disuse may as well equate to dispossession. To not use the gift, you may as well not have it. It robs us of potential power and blessing. What will we do with these lives entrusted to us to invest in the glory of God? That's what Jesus is asking. As if the loss of the gift was not bad enough, the ultimate punishment was far worse. From the most loving lips that ever spoke, in love, comes a warning to us this morning through this parable about the sin of burying the gift of life, which is to be stewarded to the glory of God. There awaits a decisive proclamation of blackness, homelessness, and sorrow. Basically, Jesus' words. Pray that we won't be blind to our responsibility to glorify God in the stewardship of all that our lives contain. It's actually joyful. We will, as we can, by his grace, enter into his joy in ever-increasing measure, both in this life and ultimately in the life to come, in the world to come, when we account for the gifts entrusted to us.